Hello and welcome to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast. If you'd like to become a patron of the podcast, we would love you to. And you can do so at patreon.com/the History Network. Thanks to all our patrons who make this podcast possible. The HistoryNetwork.org podcast, Season 39, Episode 1. Ancient Superpowers Collide, the Peloponnesian War, 431 to 404 BC. This episode was written by Murray Dahm. Murray is an ancient and medieval military historian from New Zealand living in Australia. He has written more than 100 articles on various aspects of ancient and medieval military history, as well as other historical topics from all periods, ranging from the history of opera to the runic alphabet and recipients of the Victoria Cross. He is the author of Macedonian Phalangite versus Persian Warrior, Athenian Hoplite versus Spartan Hoplite, and Leuctra 371 BC, all from Osprey Publishing. He is, of course, a regular writer on here and a regular on the Ancient Warfare podcast. The Peloponnesian War pitted the two most powerful ancient Greek states, Athens and Sparta, and their respective allies against each other in an epic struggle for the control of all of Greece. The seeds for the war between Sparta, Athens, and their allies was sown 50 years earlier through the success of the Greek states, led by Athens and Sparta, in defeating the Persian invasion of Xerxes I. In 480 BC, the Persians had invaded mainland Greece with overwhelming numbers to punish the Greeks for their part in the revolt of Persian subject states on the coast of Anatolia, known as the Ionian Revolt. Xerxes crossed the Hellespont and marched with an enormous army, supposedly more than 5 million men, and an equally enormous fleet. His destination was the cities of Eretria and Athens, the two cities which had most aided the Ionian Revolt. Many Greek cities along the route immediately cooperated with the invader, known as medizing. After great debate, several Greek city-states decided to resist the invasion and rightly viewed it as Persian territorial expansion. They faced the Persians at the battles of Thermopylae, Artemisium, and Salamis in 480, and at Plataea and Mycale in 479. The defence of the Thermopylae Pass and the naval battle at Artemisium were defeats. Artemisium might optimistically be termed a draw, but the Greek hoplites and naval forces saw that they were superior to their Persian counterparts. At the naval battle of Salamis in 480, and then the massive land battle of Plataea in 479, and the combined naval and land battle of Mycale, supposedly fought on the same day as Plataea, the combined forces of the Greeks defeated the more numerous Persians. These successes on both sea and land created and fostered an immense self-confidence in the Greek states. They had achieved what no one thought they could. It was this success and confidence, however, which led to an inevitable power struggle between Sparta and Athens. Even the ancients recognized that Sparta was the natural leader of the Greeks on land, with a formidable army and a political system designed to produce the best hoplites. At the same time, Athens was recognized as the dominant sea power. She had furnished the most ships and continued to have the most powerful navy. Unlike Sparta, she also had outward-looking imperial ambitions. Athens and Sparta were cities of great contrasts. Sparta had a unique political system of dual monarchies and an education system designed to produce only warriors, the Spartiates. All adult males in Sparta had only one job, that of being hoplites. The state and its vast system of state slaves, the helots, were designed to facilitate and support the military dominance of Sparta. Sparta was a conservative city and culture, and she was surrounded by other cities in the Peloponnese who benefited from Sparta's military protection. These were known as periakoi, or dwellers around. Her political system, which stretched back to the 7th century BC at least, was also old-fashioned and had avoided the disruptions which other Greek states had experienced in the 7th and 6th centuries, when tyranny and other political systems came to the fore. Athens, by contrast, was a progressive city, full of new ideas and new wealth. The most radical of the new ideas was democracy, a political system which also came out of the political turmoil of the 7th and 6th centuries, and was Athens's way of dealing with those people who had gained wealth and power with the rise of hoplite warfare and increased maritime trade. Democracy reached its final form in the late 6th century, and the success of Athens in staving off the Persian invasions proved its efficacy. The first invasion had been in 490 and was in part an attempt to reinstall tyranny at Athens. This invasion had been repelled almost single-handed at the Battle of Marathon. Athens's wealth and prowess had continued to thrive thereafter, and by 480 she had the most powerful Greek navy. Following the successes of the Persian Wars, Sparta continued to dominate land-based Greek cities, and through the Peloponnesian League she built a powerful network of allies throughout Greece. At the same time, however, Sparta, as a conservative and traditional culture, did not embrace the idea of empire building, especially not when it involved overseas states. Athens, by contrast, took every opportunity to build herself an empire, especially when it involved states overseas. Following the successes of Greek naval forces during the Persian Wars, Athens took on the leadership of a naval alliance, intended to keep Persian influence at bay. The Delian League Sparta had been offered, but refused the leadership of the League. Membership included many of the Greek islands and coastal states. Athens then systematically turned this league into an empire of her own during the 50 years following the Persian Wars. During the Pentakontasia, which literally means the 50-year period. This inevitably saw Athens and Sparta come into conflict, as their allies, spheres of influence, and even the contrasting cultures of the two cities butted against one another. We have several sources for the Peloponnesian War. The most important of these are Thucydides, an Athenian aristocratic general who wrote a history of the war from 431 to 410, and is regarded as the first scientific historian. The second important source is Xenophon, who wrote a continuation of Thucydides' work, the Hellenica, covering the end of the war and continuing down to 362. Even though Xenophon was an Athenian, he was an admirer of Sparta, and so the perspective of these two works is markedly different. Thucydides prided himself on his neutrality and even-handedness, and is still regarded today as one of the best examples of ancient history writing. We have other sources too, from other surviving historians, such as Diodorus Siculus, and other literature such as the plays of Aristophanes and the dialogues of Plato. Many of these sources must be used with great care to discover what happened during the war. The first steps towards this inevitable conflict came when Athens's dominance of the Delian League caused the Spartans to become alarmed at the growth of the Athenian power. Athens built a series of walls between the city and the harbour at the Piraeus, which protected both from attack and looked like a preparation for war. An intermittent series of conflicts broke out, which we know as the First Peloponnesian War between 460 and 445, but they ended with a 30-year peace made in 445, where Athens and Sparta agreed to recognise each other's sphere of influence and also to guarantee any other state's right to join either side or to remain neutral. Spheres of influence and a right to neutrality is important for how war broke out again in 431. The city of Corinth was an ally of Sparta, but several of her colonies were dominated by Athens. Corcyra at her own request, and Potidaea forcibly. Corinth understandably agitated for Spartan intervention in Athenian activities. The city of Megara, a Spartan ally, was then forbidden from trading with Athens or her allies. Another Spartan ally, Thebes, then attacked the city of Plataea, one of Athens's allies. Sparta and her allies decided that Athens had broken the peace, and in 431 invaded Athens' home territory of Attica and ravaged the land, destroying crops and farms. The 30-year peace agreed in 445 had lasted less than half that. The political leader in Athens at the time, Pericles, had foreseen that this would be the Spartan tactic, however, and rather than face the Spartans on land, he had suggested a policy whereby the population of Attica would withdraw into the safety of the newly built long walls and simply sit out the Spartan raids on Attic farms. The population would survive on maritime trade and avoiding fighting the Spartans in the land battles they were trying to provoke. The intention was also to launch naval raids into Peloponnesian territory from the safety of the walled harbour. The Athenians followed this tactic for the first years of the war, despite the unpopularity of allowing their crops and homes to be destroyed. Pericles survived a challenge to his power, and the policy continued. The Spartan invasions were an annual event, but were only temporary, and Spartan forces returned home after they destroyed some Athenian crops and farms. It is difficult to assess how much damage they did, but they cannot have destroyed all the Athenian harvest or reached every corner of Attica. In some years they spent less than 2 weeks ravaging Attica. It must also have been frustrating to the Spartans that their mighty army was reduced to burning crops and homes. Behind the walls at Athens, however, with the population of the countryside sheltering and crammed into a small space, plague broke out in 430 and in the years thereafter. Disastrously for Athens, Pericles himself died of the plague in 429. He seems to have been the only Athenian politician with the vision to foresee that his strategy would continue to succeed. Thereafter Athens was beset with another kind of plague, demagogues who stirred the Athenian voters into a frenzy with their rhetoric and who sought only political power, but had no clear policy for winning war, became more and more prominent in Athenian politics. 2 parties dominated, those led by Nicias, who favoured defence, and Cleon, who favoured aggression. In 428, one of Athens's most powerful allies, Mytilene, revolted from the empire. This led to a fear that more states would follow suit, and so Athens voted to put the entire male population of the city to death and to enslave the women and children. In a sign of the political indecision of Athens, this decision was overturned the following day, and eventually only the leaders of the rebellion were put to death. In 425-4, One of the Athenian raids on Peloponnesian territory was able to surround a force of Spartan hoplites on the island of Sphacteria. This was an unexpected and spectacular success for the Athenians, as the Spartans surrendered and sued for peace. Athens immediately squandered the peace by looking to continue an aggressive policy, and were decisively beaten themselves by the Thebans at the Battle of Delium later in 424. A Spartan general, Brasidas, was also able to capture the Athenian colony of Amphipolis in the north. In the attempt to recapture Amphipolis in 422, the aggressive Cleon was killed. Brasidas also fell. This allowed another peace to be concluded. Athens would regain Amphipolis, and she would return the Spartan prisoners from Sphacteria. The Peace of Nicias in 41 BC was intended to last 50 years. It wouldn't last 8. Once again, however, Athens squandered the peace, this time with an ambitious, unnecessary, and aggressive plan to attack Sicily and bring it within the Athenian Empire. The Sicilian expedition of 415 ended in utter disaster in 413, and the entire Athenian force was destroyed, losing close to 200 ships and almost 5,000 men. There were probably 50,000 allied forces who also perished. The loss in Sicily damaged Athens's reputation and her ability to control her empire. Allies around the empire revolted from Athens's control, and Athens herself was thrown into political turmoil. The democracy was briefly overthrown in 411 by an oligarchy, but in a sign of the tremendous resilience of Athens, she fought on, rebuilt her army and navy, and even won several victories, such as at the naval battle of Arginusae in 406 BC. In 413, the Spartans also did something different. In their yearly invasions during the war to that point, the Spartans had ravaged Athenian land and then returned to Sparta until the following year. In 413, however, they captured the town of Decelea, only a short distance from Athens, visible from its walls, in fact, and they stayed there. This allowed them to prevent the Athenians leaving the city and allowed them to launch raids into Attica year-round. The setbacks suffered by Athens in the Sicilian expedition had two main ramifications. Firstly, the war shifted into the Aegean Sea, and as Athens's allies deserted her, Athens's navy and financial resources shrank. This allowed Sparta and her allies to build up their own naval resources and vie with Athens on a more even footing. The second ramification was that Persia, defeated 50 years earlier in 479 and kept out of the Aegean by the growth and power of the Delian League, Athenian Empire, now saw the opportunity to once again wield power and influence in the region. Persia provided support and ships for the former allies who broke away from Athenian control, and when approached by the Spartan general Lysander, Persia provided funds for a Spartan fleet. Lysander's foresight in developing a Spartan navy sealed Athens's fate. In 405, the Athenian fleet was destroyed at the naval battle of Aegospotamiae, and Athens no longer had the financial resources to build another. That victory in the Hellespont also allowed Sparta to cut off Athens's supply of grain from the Black Sea and essentially starve Athens into submission. Still, Athens tried to fight on, but in 404 she surrendered unconditionally. The walls were torn down, a Spartan garrison was installed, and Athens's democracy was replaced with a government of 30 tyrants who were pro-Spartan and who punished Athenian citizens, eliminating opposition and any who might show potential to oppose Spartan will. The Spartan victory in the Peloponnesian War was the high tide mark of her power and dominance of Greece, and yet the reassertion of Persian influence was an ominous sign of things to come in the following decades. The ambition, resilience and confidence of Athens and other Greek city-states would mean that the end of Sparta's power was also within sight. Well, thanks for writing that opening episode for season 39 for us, Murray. If you'd like to have a go at writing an episode for us, or you want to contact us and give us an idea for a subject that you think we've not covered yet, then just drop us a line, info@thehistorynetwork.org for that. And once again, please do consider becoming a patron of the podcast at patreon.com/thehistorynetwork. Once again, thank you to all our patrons who make this podcast possible. Thanks again for listening. You've been listening to the historynetwork.org podcast, written by Murray Darm, read by Nick Barker.